I would say the majority of our customers come to us looking for advice on is weight loss. So it's something which is very high up on in terms of people's goals. And the trend of obesity and people being overweight is obviously sort of continuing to move in the wrong direction, especially in Western cultures as well. And even when people are looking to diet and making that conscious effort to do so, diets are very hit and miss. So, we've spoken about, the failure rate of diets. So I guess that's the question for today is why are diets and dieting in general, why is it so unreliable in a lot of cases? Why does it fail some people in a lot of cases? And is there a genetic element to this that we can explore as well?
Sure. No, I think it's a great question. So I think first we need to kind of remove a misconception. So I actually had a conversation in the office with a lot of people around this, and people think losing weight's about metabolism, and you'll hear these statements all along where people say, oh, well, so-and-so is thinner because he's got a high metabolism, or I'm putting on weight because he's got a low metabolism. But in reality, eating and then therefore putting on weight is about behavior. So if you put it into the context of you will feel hungry, you'll then pursue food. So there's the motivations, and then there's the incentives and the feedback of when you're eating food. And then your body can then assimilate all these. So the one thing your body is very good at is homeostatic corrective behaviors. So if you're doing lots of eating, generally, when you put lots of weight on, your body will reduce your hunger and increase energy expenditure. If you go in the other way, where you're very lean, it can do the reverse. And this makes, again, you talked about evolution, perfect sense. And your body is full of hormones and signaling molecules that are secreted from your guts, the fat cells in your body, your pancreas, that then provide short and long-term signals to tell you the person's nutritional status. So this is a very complex process, and all this thing guides your behavior to pursue food in the future. And the way you got to think about this is we've got this internal MyFitnessPal that's kind of assessing what you've eaten and then telling you what you should go for next, or how, I guess MyFitnessPal is how many calories have I got left, and there's a whole argument around the behaviors around that. But ultimately, your body is assessing what you've got and what you need. Now, the glib diets that generally hang around are like removing one macronutrients, calorie counting, and they don't really take into account this complex set of feedback loops that's also interacting with your environment. And there's the second tier of information that we need to talk about, which you mentioned. There's the genetic component, that in some people this homeostatic process doesn't work very well. So these people are therefore more prone to put on weight.
So yeah, and I mean, so that raises interesting questions about whether these behaviours are learned or whether they're biologically programmed, and I'm sure that's something that we can sort of explore a little bit more. But I want to pick up on that idea about sort of hormones and the roles that they play in terms of shaping people's eating behaviours. Do you have some examples that you can share with us?
Yeah, I think that let's start with just, again, on the evolutionary sense, that most of human history, we've been in environments where starvation wasn't the problem, not obesity. So this is a very new context. So that's one of them. Sort of classically is one of the earliest of these hormone sets that was identified, which is a hormone called leptin. So leptin is secreted by the fat cells in your body. So the more fat you have, then the more leptin you secrete. Levels can also alter when you go through periods of fasting as well, but generally this is kind of more a medium term analysis of what your fat content is, which is very important for survival. So basically, it tells your body how much fat mass you have. So no leptin signaling means you have no fat, and it will initiate the starvation response. But when leptin's circulating, so you've got lots of leptin in your body, this activates a downstream component, which is the melanocortin system, and this promotes your brain through another set of neurons downstream of where the leptin binds to promote satiety, so you feel more full, and it also enables you to increase energy expenditure. On an interesting caveat here, and there's probably a lot of women that have fasted, or we've had bodybuilders in the past where they get to very low body fat percentages and they stop menstruating. And you think menstruation is a energy expensive process, And this is because, or partially because, their leptin levels drop to such a level, it stops you expending energy on things such as menstruation. If you starve children, and actually historically children went through puberty later in life, and it's through the same process. So a lot of these biological pathways are actually very much linked to stopping starvation.
Okay, so just taking a step back to make sure I've understood. So leptin levels increase when we have energy that's available for us to use, so that we're not looking to go and consume more through foods.
Yeah, and again, there's obviously there's many other pathways in the brain that regulate insulin. But this is one of the broad pathways that's associated with that motivation. And I think you've got to look at it more the fact that it's not that you won't be pursuing food or eating food, because again we've evolved in an environment of scarcity. It's actually when you're starving that you need acute motivation, or you're going to die. So it's really around the motivation at that level.
Okay, so in terms of leptin's role, so with its regulation of appetite, are there ways in which, I guess leptin dysfunction can actually lead to people overeating, and that can actually be a root cause of being overweight or being obese?
Sure. So imagine you are overweight, but the cells, so you've got lots of leptin around your bloodstream, binding to receptors in your brain, or trying to bind receptor in the brain, but actually those receptors, for example, don't recognize the leptin signal. You have a very overweight person that thinks they're starving. So you've got a very fat person that has a massive drive towards eating. And these, so mutations were found in patients with clinical obesity in both leptin itself and in the leptin receptor. So here's a prime example where this basic process that tells your body if you've got body fat can go wrong, and therefore we'll be looking externally at the individual going, this person has, it's just terrible behavior, no restraint, but actually their body believes it's starving and behaves accordingly. I think there's one of the famous examples is one of the early patients was going through the freezer and eating boxes of frozen fish fingers. It's the state you would be in where you believe you need to eat anything. And they actually look at, in some of the patients as well, food preference, and someone's full and has normal functioning leptin, that they may be attracted to, say, a burger, but things like cauliflower and stuff are just not that attractive to them, because again, in an evolutionary context, if there's a high calorie food present, eat it, because you might not see it again. But actually with these leptin patients, they find all food incredibly attractive. As you can imagine, when you're really, really hungry, you just eat anything. So yeah, there's, these people, so the brain thinks you've got no fat reserves, and it enacts the starvation response. Now that's so that's at the sort of front end of the pathway. Now what happens? Leptin binds to neurons, and then this creates a series of protein interactions and cascades through different neurons, and there's genes associated with this process. So one's called POMC, one's called MC4R, which is the melanocortin pathway. You get mutations in these downstream components as well. So leptin tells the brain you've got fat, and then these proteins then elicit the satiety and the energy expenditure responses. So inject a leptin patient with a leptin mutation with leptin, and it would solve the problem. It would reduce the calorie intake. But say if you got a mutation in MC4R, which is the bit that initiates the satiety response, and this also, there are people out there, I think actually roughly 200,000 people in the UK have a mutation in MC4R. You could inject them with leptin, that's fine, but it still won't have an effect. Because that's actually something different downstream and actually elicits the response in a different way, further down the chain. So you've got all these different components of this pathway that if you get mutations in, you can behave like you need to pursue food when actually you don't. And again, this is one of the fundamental pathways in the genetic forms of obesity that are seen.
Okay, so again, just to take a step back, so we've got two scenarios when people will be going out to seek food and overconsume calories. The first is genuine starvation, which is signalled by low leptin levels and is a genuine reason to go do that. But then the second is where they're not in starvation mode, but because of leptin dysregulation or a low sensitivity to leptin, their body thinks that they are within that mode and that they need to go and seek out those calories. And so that's sort of artificial starvation, but is therefore leading to this issue where they are over-consuming and carrying excess body fat. And that's almost biologically programmed.
For sure. Yeah, these people, it's not a lack of willpower or, poor upbringing. It is their biology, innately their biology.
So you mentioned leptin injections as being a possible solution. I mean, if this is sort of hard-coded into their DNA, then what do they actually do about it?
Sure. So let's break this into two. Excuse me. So you've got these loss of function mutations. So you've got different grades of mutations. You've got ones which totally knock out the protein, and these are generally more severe, broadly in disease, not just in obesity. And you have these mutations that don't knock the genes out, but they're kind of like dimmer switches. So you're kind of producing levels of these proteins, or they may be functioning to a reasonable amount, but actually they still will give you a slight disadvantage, so increase your hunger slightly in particular contexts. So polygenetic disease, as that part fits into, is very much an environmental genetic interaction. But with the extreme ones first, obviously booming on the market at the moment of all these weight loss jabs, GLP-1, etc. And there is, for the people with the loss of function mutations, so the extreme forms, I believe that's probably where they need to go, because it is very difficult to fight against that tide of starvation response. Yeah. So that I think that's clinical. These are clinical forms of obesity, and really medication is where those individuals go. What's happening at the moment, you get this creep of everyone who generally is overweight having these injections, and a lot of these people will have more the polygenic, the more common mutations that are not an extreme. And actually these mutations, so if you have lots of these mutations, your risk of being obesity is very high. But actually, if you have some of these mutations, it's generally an environmental interaction. So it's the context. So if you think about these lot of common mutations, you didn't see these people being fat until we entered the obesogenic environments. So let's think about it in terms of our customer group and how they would think about it. So you are, you go on a diet. Let's take ketogenic diet, for example. A high-fat diet. So I've read several papers around the ketogenic diet. So you're increasing the amount of fat in your food as part of that diet. So we've just talked about MC4R as part of the melanocortin system. People with mutations in MC4R have a higher fat preference. So you're more likely to overeat on fat. So those individuals actually may pursue fatty meals. So what are you doing during a ketogenic diet is you're increasing the amount of fatty food in your fridge, in your house. So you've adjusted your environment, but your genetics is driving you to overeat fat. Let's look at another couple of mutations. These are common within the population. One in the CD36 gene and one in, I think, TNN13K. So CD36 actually, interestingly, encodes fat receptors on your tongue. We have all these, we know about all the tastes and stuff, umami, salty, sweet. But actually, when we eat fat, in the mouth, the body, these receptors detect the fat and send signals to the brain to go, you've eaten some fat. And then again, with this homeostatic process, this is kind of like your internal MyFitnessPal. It goes, okay, well, we know fat's coming into the brain. Into the body, into the gut. We will digest it. We're secreting the right hormones to digest it, to get everything out. What happens in some people is you don't actually perceive fat going into the body. So the body is not recognizing fat in the diet, and therefore will increase your motivation to eat more. So all these genes I'm talking about at the moment are associated with increased body mass, BMI, increased fat mass. So we've got, all of a sudden, you're linking all these different common variants that actually, if you have, so these are good three examples where if you're, say, on a high fat diet, you are more likely to, so you're eating fat in your diet, you're not recognizing there's fat in your diet, which therefore you're going to be more motivated to eat, i.e. increased risk of failure of that diet. And actually you're pursuing more fat anyway, and you've created an environment where there's lots of fatty food in the fridge, and those moments where you fall off the wagon, you're presented with all these wonderfully high fat food options, even if they are, complex foods, healthy foods, good oils, good meats. Still, you'll still end up going over your calorie intake of the day. And therefore you're going to fail. And there's sets of genes that you can look at in terms of sucrose and sugar as well, where you can be more incentivized or more motivated to eat sugars too. So there is a genetic context where, in theory, there'll be lots of people out there on the internet going saying ketogenic diet saved my life, and there are people that do lose weight and are very successful on the ketogenic diet, and some people go, well, it doesn't work for me. Here's a series of genetic examples where actually your internal biology is sabotaging your ability to be successful in the first place. Now, when we talk about diets in general, where you've got this, defined period of time where you're in a study and you're eating your foods, and then that's great, and then you go back into the world where you've got family meals and Christmases or holidays and everything else. All of a sudden, the environment in the research paper is not representative of what real life looks like. So, going back to the failure of these studies, environment, people still think about macronutrients, and there are lots and lots of papers around macronutrient changes and which diet is the right one. But actually, it's the environment we should really be concentrating on. And that, in essence, is because it's about behavioural control, and we behave within the environments, our supermarkets, our fridge at home, the relationships we have, how we reward ourselves and treat ourselves. That they're a lot of the contexts of our eating behaviours.
Well, and that's also really important because that's the component that you can change and you can control. Although
Exactly,
you can do a genetic test to identify these potential risk factors and these common mutations, and you can use that to make a decision as to what type of diet may be most suitable for you. At FitnessGenes, we don't currently offer gene therapy, which can say, oh, if you want to do a ketogenic diet, then all we need to do is do a few alterations and then that might work for you. So the environmental lifestyle component is critical here.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. And I think the knowledge, and the one thing we've realised, and again, because when you're a scientist, you're immersed in all this stuff, you kind of, about tons of this. But when you talk to, customers, and we've had PTs as well, that have been working with and nutritionists who have been working with their clients, and actually the fundamental understanding that it could be the fact they have issues with leptin, the fact is they have mutations that mean they pursue fat or do not taste fat or pursue sucrose, or actually have impulsive behaviours around food, that just the knowledge of these things happening, one, it destigmatizes it, and two, it actually enables them to, okay, well, the fact is I've been told to eat eggs, and eggs are healthy, I'm not talking about, but actually a fridge full of boiled eggs actually is not great for me because I'm going to be constantly pursuing the fat in the egg yolk. So it's just the understanding of the variation they have to respond to different food cues and to actually desire specific foods can enable you to sort of rearrange your environment. I guess there's a second tier to this. So my genetics and it sort of makes sense in terms of my life. I'm quite impulsive around food, so I'm not necessarily overly hungry, but if I'm a bit stressed, or if there's food, like in a buffet, I'll be eating food and not even, and I'm sure some people listening to this can recognize this, but I won't even know I'm eating. I have that impulsivity. There'll be those moments when I'm thinking about something or planning something or writing something in my head, I'm eating. And so it's mindless eating. However, I've got great cognitive restraint, which means I will not buy biscuits, crisps, etc. and put them in the house. So I can very much manage that environment for myself. Problem: my wife and 2 children. Wife has no disinhibition at all, as in she can buy a bag of mini chocolate bars, put them in a cupboard, and every 2 weeks she might have one with a cup of tea. Like, there'll be a moment in a week where that bag of Mars bars disappears within the space of like 2 or 3 hours. And that's me on my stressful day at work. And now that I am mindful, so I've got abilities of dealing with it. So it's kind of like replacement vices. When I have that cue, I'm a bit stressed, I just go outside, go for a walk, listen to my favorite, current audiobook I'm listening to, or just pick up my book, just have 10 minutes of doing something else enjoyable to just try and mitigate it. It doesn't always work, but you've got that ability to sort of recognize that cue and do something about it. There's the negotiation component as well. Is I will speak to Sam and be like, this is how I respond to food. And she'd be like, I don't get why you do this. Because, of course, biologically, she's in a different context to me. And it will be very much, okay. And she hides them in random places now. Because there's a cupboard, it's not in the cupboard, I'm fine. I'm not quite at the leptin mutation stage where I'm tearing all the cupboards apart looking for it. But if I open the cupboard and it looks at me, I may not eat it that day, but 2 or 3 days' time, I'm eating it. So she'll literally hide them in random places. The annoying thing is sometimes if I'm looking for something, I'll find a bag of chocolate bars, and it's strange. There'll be that moment then where they disappear. But so there's the working with your partner or whoever you live with is really important. Food preparation's key. So if I do have that impulse, if there's something very healthy in the fridge, I'll be snacking on that. I have very distinct go-to meals. So I know what lunch I'm having every day this week. I know the components of it. I know what I'm buying. It's salad, it's whole food. Because if it's not there, then it'll be like the tortilla kit, dismantled cheese, ham, or whatever's in the fridge, which will be like processed food and high calorie, which is not good for me. As Sam would be very much, I'll wait till I make a dinner in the evening, as I'm just instinctively pursuing that food. So actually, when we think, and because a lot of the zeitgeist at the moment is about processed food, and that's really important, because the way unprocessed food helps us feel full, the right fiber, protein concentration components in is great, but actually that only sits within the environments you're experiencing. The cues, the habits, how you want to. Another example is how do you start to get rid of bad foods. And one of these diets you have where, okay, you're on your diet, you're filling in your questionnaire, you don't eat your Mars bar for 2, 3, 4 weeks in the evening, and then you go back to your environment where you sit on the sofa, you don't have that authority position within the trial, and you go, do you know what, I'll just have a Mars bar tonight, I've done ever so well, let's reward myself. So it's kind of the different psychological components of your interaction with your environment are the huge drivers of obesity, and it all sits within this set of pathways within the body that have evolved within scarce environments where you need to pursue food because starvation is the biggest risk. Obesity was a luxury to the extreme for most of human history.
And I guess that's what we need to get to, is these longer term solutions. And it sounds like that comes through the structure that you discussed. It comes through kind of that mindfulness, that sort of negotiation with others around you. But it also sounds like those things can only come out of having an understanding and the knowledge of these factors that may be driving these behaviours in the first place.
For sure. Are you inclined to pursue particular macronutrients? Feel more hungry when you eat them because you're not registering the fact they're being internally taken? And what are your behaviors in the food environment? So I talked about the impulsivity. So I have mutations in the dopamine D2 receptor gene, and this is broadly linked to behavioral traits such as like impulsivity, sensation seeking, preference for immediate rewards. So you can see here the bag of Mars bars or the chocolate bars are available. But of course, this leads to these. You can imagine how this exists within more broadly in the world. It could be we always talk about trade-offs. That is an advantageous trait to have, where you're pursuing reward, sensation, impulsivity. It's beneficial in the prehistoric world, so to speak, but in a kitchen full of high-calorie foods, it's not ideal. So, you know, it's understanding your ability to restrain yourself around food also. And then, for me, cognitive restraint's a really important thing. And if the partner in my house doesn't need that restraint, then the strategic placement of food in holes and drawers around the house.
And just finally, I'd like to just take you back to one point you made earlier about this sort of destigmatization that this sort of brings into dieting, because that's certainly something that I've seen when I've been talking with our own customers. So one of the genes we haven't touched on today is FTO, a gene linked to sort of overeating and obesity. And we always thought that by telling someone that they carried mutations within the FTO gene, which led to overconsumption of calories, that they'd say, oh, well, you know, it's my destiny to be overweight, or you know, there's nothing I can do about it. I'm biologically programmed that way. But then what we've actually found is that information being quite liberating, and people saying, oh, I knew there was something going on, and it wasn't just my willpower or my lack of willpower. And I think that's quite interesting when you think about how, I mean, you touched on the obesogenic environment that we currently live in, and how that environment, even over the last 70 years, has shifted so much in terms of the availability of different types of food. But essentially, the genetic code that we're all carrying around with us hasn't shifted at all. So when people do carry this sort of level of blame, clearly from what we talked about today, that isn't necessarily justified, because a lot of it is coming from their environment.
Sure, yeah. I think the combination of genetics and this incredibly difficult environment, it is key to obesity. I think there's a point on the motivation. I think there'll always be some people that are motivated to change, but let's think about the people that are motivated. It's really hard for those guys to do something and not get any success. That's a very difficult position to be put in, and the fact that this knowledge can enable them to negotiate an incredibly noisy diet marketplace of what to do, to actually find the things, understand why things haven't worked in the past, and understand what they should do better in the future is I've only seen that to be empowering with people.
Great, and I think that's a nice point to end on as well.
Fantastic.
I've got a packet of frozen fish fingers in the freezer that I need to go and eat.
You're going to smash it to pieces.
Yeah,
I've got nothing on my desk, thank God.
Thanks, Stu. I'll let you get back to your Mars bars and more.
So I've got rooting through the drawers and stuff.
Go back to your search for Mars bars.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you.